morning. Good morning. Thank you for coming today to this lecture series. My name is Richard Buchanan. I'm chair of the Department of Design and Innovation, as many of you know. But it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the Keithley lecture. And let me explain a little bit about the Keithley lecture. Joe Keithley is one of the great friends of the university and a special friend of Weatherhead and a special friend of design and innovation. He has been a great stimulus and a source of support and encouragement, intellectually as well as practically. And this lecture series is named after him. He's given this support for this lecture series in order to stimulate integration of ideas across our disciplines, our fields. And we choose every year 2 speakers to represent the ideas of, well, I suppose of the department and also of the school as a whole. And our speaker today is Kamil Michlewski. Kamil is a good friend and colleague from the UK. And let me say something about what Kamil does. In the 1930s and 40s, John Dewey, the great American philosopher, said that the greatest problem of our time, and he speaks deeply, is the disconnect between theory and practice. We have tended to drive those apart, and we pay a price for that. We pay a price for that in the values that lead us in practice, and that our theories are not well grounded. Well, I will say that Kamil, one of the reasons I have such respect for his work is that he spans that bridge from theory to practice. He's done significant research in the area of design and organization, and he also practices as a consultant with many firms and coaching and advising. So he teaches, building theory and practice, and he brings practice and theory together in his work. It's a great addition, and it's a great honor for me to be able to welcome you to Weatherhead. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you very much for having me today. Good morning. It's an absolute honor to be here. It's an absolute honor to present to you the ideas that I have and the things that I've discovered. I know it might be a bit difficult to picture this because it's quite cold outside, but please bear with me. It's a warm July afternoon. I'm sitting at a small table. There are 2 people in front of me. And I'm having what can only be described as an out-of-body experience. So one of these guys leans over and a softly spoken voice says, "Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it magical?" And as he says these words, I get an overwhelming feeling that I'm witnessing something special, something rather unique. The year is 2007, July 2007. The guy sitting opposite me is Johnny Ive, or Sir Johnny Ive, the Apple's chief designer. It's Cupertino, California. So the story I'm about to tell you today is about Johnny and his tribe, and my sincere belief that they have something profound to teach us all as people, as humans, and as managers. They also have something profound to add to companies in how they think about themselves, how deeply and meaningfully they innovate. So my odyssey began here in Newcastle upon Tyne, in the School of Design, the same place to which Johnny went. And I sort of parachuted myself on a European scholarship, really thinking that I would do a simple literature review on a completely unrelated subject. And at that point, I was a complete blank slate with regards to design. Complete tabula rasa. I didn't know anything. So I was coming in very fresh. And what I was experiencing, what I was seeing, absolutely astounded me, baffled me. I didn't know what I was to make of all this. And so, after a while, I've succumbed to that pressure of the new and unexpected that I was seeing and witnessing in the design community, in the design school, and decided to do a completely new PhD project based in that school. Now, just hold that thought. Do you know this guy in the middle? Anybody? Any guesses? Well, let me introduce to you my personal hero, Bronisław Malinowski. Bronisław Malinowski and I share the same country of birth, that is Poland, and the same country of scholarly adventure, that is Britain. But that's really not that important. What is important, really, is that Malinowski is simply the father of modern anthropology. Before Malinowski, anthropologists would basically correspond with people who visited far-flung places. They would talk to explorers who witnessed foreign cultures. They wouldn't bother, really, leaving their comfy chairs. They would just stay in one place. They wouldn't go anywhere. That was the state of anthropology before Malinowski. His groundbreaking work in Papua New Guinea and in the islands of Trobriand and South Pacific changed all that. He really sort of opened up this field in an absolutely dramatic way. And he had an epiphany. Indeed. And I had this sort of similar sort of epiphany whilst there. As I told you, I was relatively new and not exposed to design prior to coming there. So I started reading. I started reading as much as I could about, designers and the design community. And what I was getting really was quite generic. Really wasn't satisfying me and my cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing in the school. And these were the sorts of things that I was reading. Design is risky, rhetorical, exploratory, persuasive, curious, reflective, innovative, holistic, critical, opportunistic, imaginative, abductive, and above all, creative. And that one really gets me going, because I think everybody is creative. Absolutely every single person is creative. And every single profession has to be creative to make any kind of progress. So as you can see, there's a bunch of relatively generic ideas, and they were all being used to describe designers and the design community and the design culture. So I wasn't satisfied. And talking about creativity, let me give you this beauty. Collateralized debt obligations. Accountants are creative too. They are creative in different ways. So it's really something that struck me, that there was loads and loads of volumes written on the designly ways of knowing, and how designers go about doing things. And the point was that really I wasn't getting anywhere to bridge that gap between what I was experiencing and those statements. And this was my tent. Slightly bigger than his, but still very, very useful. Indeed, this was my tent, but it was also the place where designers did their thing. It was a really important thing for me to discover it. Now, as I was doing my research and I was experiencing this wonderful world, I've noticed something, and this something was basically an exhibit at a graduate show. It absolutely shook me to the core, took my comfort zone, and dropped it down the toilet. It was to do with strawberries. It was essentially a very dense row of transparent plastic tubes with strawberries on top. How peculiar, I thought to myself. Would you like to see it? Here it is. After a while, managed to dig out this photo from 2001. And so my first, second, and third reaction was, what on earth is this? I was violated, I was stirred to the core by what I was experiencing, what I was seeing. I mean, how can anybody in their rightful mind put something that looks like this and claim it to be A, a finished article of any sort, and B, for it to be any, have any meaningful use in a business context? And remember, it was the design school rather than the School of Fine Arts. So it was really a place that was creating the sort of manufactured future of tomorrow, with the designers doing it. So I was really stirred and surprised and shaken by the whole thing. The very diligent student of Taylorism and Mintzberg and Co. Really worshipping at the altar of net present value and working capital and price to earnings ratio. This was something that really stirred me to the core. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to dismiss it. Let's just stick with it. Let's just run with it and see where this thing can take me. And as I was experiencing these things, what became really apparent is that designers embrace ambiguity, open-endedness, and they are really, really good in their cultural ways of basically just saying, I do not know how this project is going to end. I have no idea, but I'm willing to give it a try. I'm just willing to give it a go. So I've defined it in that particular way. So embracing ambiguity and uncertainty, a willingness to engage in a process that is not predetermined and where outcomes are unknown or uncertain. And designers have this knack for feeling okay in a situation where they know where the starting point is, but without knowing exactly where they're going, necessarily, the final point. And to me, as a business person, somebody trained in the tradition of business models and so on, that was a heresy. That was a total heresy. How can you really not know where you're going at the beginning of the process? Surely you need to have some frameworks, surely you need to have some KPIs, surely you need to have some very clear guidelines. Otherwise, how on earth are you going to measure and judge your performance at the end of the process? I was really, really surprised that somebody can be operating in that sort of mindset. But that's exactly what was happening. So it was a quote from senior manager at IDEO that sort of really expressed it well. It's about people who are willing to be risky and comfortable with not knowing exactly what the outcome of the project is going to be. And sort of that encapsulates it. And whilst at it, I should tell you what were the other companies I've looked at in my PhD, apart from being embedded in the school design. These were the institutions I talked to. Let's talk about a few examples of how that manifests itself. The magic blue pill, the post-it note, Alexander Fleming's penicillin, and the iPhone. Now anybody knows the QI program from BBC. At this point in the program, one of the presenters will say, okay, and which one is the odd one out? I'm not going to ask you, because I believe they're all very similar. Similar in the way and in the sense that they all have serendipity at the core of their development and design. Take, for example, the magic blue pill. It was basically a failed hard drug that the company was developing. And what they did is they sent an order to recall the trial from the users, from the people. And what they discovered is that people were not sending back their pills. Slightly peculiar, they thought. And obviously, after a bit of digging, they realized what the reason was. And as they say, rest is history. The post-it note was a failed glue compound experiment. And the company thought, let's just bin it. But it turned out that the employees of 3M started using it to stick things onto the bits of paper, and hence discovered the real need for this failed thing. So again, the mindset there enabled them to say, not bin it, but actually use it and develop it into a fairly successful product, and a brand, for that matter. Alexander Fleming and the penicillin. Again, I don't know if you know this story, but basically, it was again a freak accident, if you will, because he left one of the petri dishes open, and the next day he comes back to his laboratory and discovers what he calls a fungi juice so developed and started eating at the edges of the bacteria. But only after a while, and with collaboration with other colleagues, that he actually discovered what the compound was and then turned it into a drug. So it wasn't immediate, it wasn't instant, and it wasn't pre-planned, and it wasn't predetermined. It was really allowing yourself to be surprised. And this is one of the key things that I would say, that if you're not willing to be surprised by the outcome of your work, by definition, you're not going to come up with something original. You need to be surprised. You need to allow yourself to be surprised. And the iPhone, again, an interesting story. Jobs and Ive, when developing it, didn't have that in their mind. They originally started developing the iPad, actually. And after a while, strategically pivoted towards the iPhone, but having designed and developed the iPad first. And they really allowed themselves to go with the flow. You often hear those stories. Yeah, we had this great idea, we just went along with it, and that was it. In fact, if you remember, if you cast your mind back to the original launch of the iPhone, it wasn't anything like the industry-shattering device that we know today. It was basically lacking basic features like MMS, like copy-paste. Forget about third-party apps, forget third-party access. It didn't have that at all. So it wasn't there. And the interesting bit, I was on the other side of the story. I was actually working for a competitor to Apple at that time. And some wonderful conversations we were having about, is that going to work? And as we saw, Jobs and Ive then allowed themselves, again, to be surprised and allowed themselves to develop this product and add substantive features to it. As we know, obviously, the App Store then got created, and again, the rest, as they say, is history. Nokia obliterated, BlackBerry, and the whole lot changed. So it's really key to understand that this ambiguity has real purpose, has real reason to exist. And some of these people, like really successful entrepreneurs, really great scientists, have the same kind of attitude. They are not afraid to jump off a cliff and assemble the plane on the way down. That's what they do. What else? They are not content, and they're not happy with having a sort of nice warm blanket of predictability and knowing exactly where they're going at the outset. They are very much in the same game. They're very much in the same attitude and mindset. Let's just roll. Let's just see where things can take us. But these are obviously quite extraordinary individuals. But what I'm talking about is an entire professional group having that sort of attitude. So would you like to quickly check yourselves against how deeply embedded that attitude is within you? I've got 3 questions for you. You can ask yourself mentally on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest. Are you comfortable with an ambiguous and uncertain process? Are you? Experimentation through trial and error, something you value highly? Yes, no. Not knowing precisely how a project is going to unfold makes me uncomfortable. Yet another question. So get a sense where you are on the embracing uncertainty and ambiguity scale. Now, moving on to the next aspect of design attitude, and by the way, there are 5. It's important to talk about this distinction, users and consumers. And it sort of sounds like a small, innocuous thing. It almost could sound like a small, almost linguistic point. But it is anything but. And you will see it. And I will urge you, next time you're listening to designers, to see how often they use the 2 words, and which of these 2 words they use most. And it would inevitably be the users. And it's really a symptom of something deeper. If you think about the differences there, consumers are people who gain utility, buy utility and pleasure. Users are a bigger bunch, bigger subset, people who are really operators. Users are simply operators of things and processes. So that's really the key point here. And there's a really nice quote that encapsulates our status as consumers. And it's probably quite apt with regards to the Cyber Monday and the Black Friday. How true is that? How true is that? And so designers do understand that, and their focus is first and foremost on the user and what the human person behind the consumer actually is. And this really shows. And I call this aspect of design attitude embracing deep empathy. And it's a deeply held conviction that it's worth suspending one's mental models in order to truly appreciate and understand fellow humans. And I believe it's absolutely fundamental to their ways of going about their daily work. So what really characterizes that is designers come in with a sort of naive point of view, with a naive stance. They're not claiming to be, really experts in a particular field. They are more interested in being experts in humans. If you contrast this with many managers, myself included, we have dozens and dozens of dictums and frameworks and models and methods that we are, ready to deploy in any moment, in any second. And it's very, very different because we think of ourselves as experts. We are experts in the field, and we come in there to spread our expertise. And we need to uphold our fees, myself included, and uphold our reputation, myself included. There's an expectation there. I carry some gravity as a business consultant. Whereas designers really have a very different approach. And this approach really comes from the fact that there aren't that many rules that they follow. And this is really really true. When I was observing designers, one thing that really became apparent is that as soon as you put a rule in front of a designer, they turn around and either circumvent that rule, create another one, or completely abandon the whole thing, because they're simply really against hard and fast rules. And this is like a big underlying theme. It's something that they really don't want to have. And I guess the point is that it's really originality and the sort of search for originality that's driving this. So there's an underlying reason for it. And so, in contrast to the designers who have no rules, we in the business community have hundreds. We can, draw from all sorts of fields. We can have all sorts of models and methods and tools and dictums upon which we are based. And many, many more, as you know. And so you can ask yourself a question. Who will be really, really feeling the need that they have to, that they absolutely have to consult the user, the human being, the person. They feel that they have to. And who would say, do you know what, I've got everything sorted, I've got everything in my hand, all I need to do is just deploy my knowledge, sort of cover you with it, and it'll be fine. Who will be more willing to draw from a variety of domains, not necessarily their own, who will be more willing to suspend mental models of their own, and who will be more humble and naive in their approach? So there's really two things that I've noticed are driving it. So this few hard and fast rules that designers have in their possession that sort of molds that culture. And they're focused on really that deep empathy, intensive empathy that they are deploying. And here are a few examples. You might have heard about this one. There was a guy from IDEO with a camera strapped to his head and trying to experience the patient experience as it happens. And he happened to film hours and hours of the ceiling in the process. When they were viewing it, what on earth are you bringing here? That's exactly the patient experience. Patients lying there and watching ceiling for hours on end. If you think about it, immediately you can do a jump and say, okay, we can innovate. We can do something about that. We can create potentially something within the sort of wider framework, not necessarily sticking something to the ceiling. So it's that sort of deep attitude that led to that sort of approach of interrogating things. And I love this example. This is two students from Stanford who thought that they would design an incubator for the developing world. And as they went about their project, they discovered very quickly that there's no use creating a plastic box that would be deployed somewhere in the hospital where actually people can't get to the hospital in the first place. So they had to develop something that was based in the community, that could be used in a community. And there was another thing that was absolutely fascinating. It was that they managed to uncover an insight about the users, about the people using it, which was to do with a dosage of medicines. So people in rural India routinely downgrade the dosage that their doctors prescribe to them, thinking that Western medicines are too strong for them. So even though the doctor's already taking that into account, they themselves say that that dose is too much. I'm just going to take half. I'm just going to take a little bit less. So what happened is that they developed a sort of grades, and temperature was visible on this device. And obviously you need to have 37 degrees centigrade to get the incubator working properly. So what people were doing, they were actually undercutting that. And they were actually putting a lower figure, obviously rendering the whole device not only useless, but potentially harmful. So what they did, they basically, very simple thing, said, okay, if there is an OK sign on the device, on the incubator, that means the temperature has been reached. A minor thing, you would think, but based on that deep empathy, that basically transforms the whole thing. It's a small thing, and this is just the example of that deep empathy in action. And I really, really love this example. I have two little boys, as Dick knows, a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old. And we had massive problems with the smaller one in hospital, so anything that's sort of involving kids in hospital gets me going. But this example is really, really wonderful. What the team did here, they didn't change any of the medical equipment. All they did was transform the MRI into a pirate's ship. And the whole experience, from a pretty frightening and horrible one, into something that was rather pleasant. It wasn't your best Disney ride, obviously, but it was much better than what was there before, simply by adopting that sort of framework and not allowing to be stifled by what was there in the first place. And it was actually so good that the kids were really comfortable with the process. They were able to stay for longer in the MRI. it meant much faster turnaround for patients for the hospital. And it was actually so good that some kids, bless them, wanted to come back for more. So another example is Lisa Johansson from the Royal College of Art. She creates and designs absolutely amazing pieces of furniture for the care community homes in Sweden. And you can see just from that simple example how that sort of deep insight and deep empathy creates something that's perhaps a bit unusual, but actually very, very useful for the people there in that environment, creating a much better living experience. You have Simon Kinnear creating specially designed kitchen utensils for people with arthritis, alleviating their pain, and creating exercises, cooking exercises, to help people with the same problem. And not a very sexy topic, but an absolutely vital one. Screening for bowel cancer. Bowel cancer being #2 cancer killer in the UK. It's absolutely critical that people get screened, but the process that currently exists is really not up to scratch. So Matt Harrison was helping to design a better process. And again, something that other people might sort of dismiss, not my thing. Designers really get stuck in and get sort of underneath the skin of the problem. And Hayes Thomas really adopting a patient-centric rather than consultant or medic-centric view of how a knee operation should be carried out. So rather than, so the doctors have a tendency, they're just putting like straight knee, yes? Everybody should have straight knees. But in fact, people have all sorts of wonky knees. And you would think that's an obvious thing to think about. You know, you need to put a wonky knee and replace a wonky knee with a wonky knee. The medics wouldn't necessarily want to do that. So designers actually sort of looked at that problem and helped redesign the whole process that enables people have a better experience, better outcomes, and the doctors actually have a degree where they can manipulate that. So what all these have in common, apart from this deep empathy that's hiding behind them, is that they are really showing signs of humanity and humbleness and selflessness, apart from anything else, which I think again is quite telling from coming from this group. So, what are the 4 things that are really driving this deep empathy? The first one, in my view, is that they have this really heartfelt desire to focus on the intricacies of human needs and desires. The second one is the tradition in the field to really focus on the user, as I was saying, not the consumer. Absolutely, the consumer comes into the frame as well, but the sort of initial focus and the sort of really important part is the focus on the user. And then the issue about reputations and not requiring to have a sort of body of knowledge and your compliance with it driving how you are seen and driving your results and making sure that people are happy with your results. It's rather that the way you create connections, the way your products or services create a connection with a human being that really makes this tick. And then the originality and the drive for something newer and more interesting is generally there as well. In order to do that, they really need to go deeper, as it were, and find out what is the core of the issue. And in many ways, they are, I've noticed the similarity, the kind of mini Malinovskis. So I thought, what a wonderful analogy. That's exactly what designers do. And he talked about the need to really understand the intricacies in the sort of small detail of everyday life. And he used what I think is a wonderful phrase. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but it's wonderful. It's called imponderabilia of everyday life. The imponderabilia of everyday life. You cannot ponder these things. You really need to experience these things on a very deep level in order to understand them, to comprehend them. So I think that there's loads of parallels there with designers. The next design attitude aspect is what I call the power of the five senses. And this is how I describe it. It's the willingness to engage all five senses and to work with a complete aesthetic understanding of reality. Think about it. We are all operating in a world that's very rich, in a world that's full of sounds, smells, and textures, and so on. So this is our entry point. This is how it all starts. But somehow, we are conditioned in our work to strip most of that, sensorial experiences and sensorial reference points, and focus on these two. Focus on what we see and what we can hear. And that really reduces our ability to experience things and reduces our ability to innovate and do that sort of deeper engagement and deeper analysis of the situation. And then we are asked, kindly or less kindly, to come up with big reports on the back of that process. And we're coming up with 100-page reports that we try very hard. We try with all our might to come up with a report that would capture the beauty and wonderfulness of our idea or insight. And very often we fail. So I think what we were discussing earlier with Dick is very true. For ages, in the economists and people in other fields were telling us otherwise, that actually we are fairly rational human beings. What I believe is we are rather more emotional. And the center of that is the sort of emotional decision. And neuroscientists and behavioral economics people are actually coming round to that point of view, that you are really living in this world of emotion at the very moment where we make those decisions. And senses are the windows, are the triggers to those emotions. And it's in this design school, rather, it's absolutely impossible. It's such a rich place full of sounds, smells, textures, really, really varied things happening. It's impossible for the student there to develop a sort of an abstracted version of the human being, a sort of think of them as a walking brains on sticks. It's really, really difficult. Even if they tried, that's going to be difficult because they're surrounded by, machinery of creating things with sound, smells, and so on and so forth. And contrast that, and I know that Weatherhead is at the forefront of the changes there, but contrast that with your typical business schools where really that's rather quite poor, the sort of sensorial exploration of the world around us. So a couple of examples of how that sort of manifests itself. Have you asked yourself a question, what could electricity consumption sound like? Me neither. But a couple of students, Dan and Flora, again from RCA, have. And they are employing here the sort of first aspect of design attitude, embracing ambiguity and discontinuity, because I have no idea where they're going to end up with this. But it's worth having a listen. No idea where they're going to end up with this. It might end up completely in the bin. But it's to demonstrate the point that they are really using all the available senses to explore what's possible, to explore how to do things and how to innovate. The next one is a wonderful example. The device you see in the middle is helping people with dementia eat more. It's an absolutely crucial problem. People with dementia forget to eat and they lose weight pretty quickly. So designers have come up with an olfactory watch, or olfactory clock rather, that sends these sort of whiffs of smells of their favorite food at intervals when people should be eating. So instead of something visual, a map that people might forget to look at or something, they cannot escape it. It's there, it's right there, and it's really been helping people, and it's been being rolled out and attracted big funding. Another one is a brilliant example. Solveig from the Brunel University just recently received James Dyson Award for this innovation, and this is a bioreactive food label. If you think about it, it's sort of obvious, but only when you see it delivered. It's a bioreactive food label that's based on gelatin that deteriorates at the same factor as the food inside, and you can adjust the two, revealing tiny little pimples when the food is due to be thrown out. So you can just very, very quickly, at a sort of a quick touch of the packaging, ascertain whether the food is still okay to eat or not. So again, that might save hundreds of millions and hundreds of millions of tons of food wasted as well, potentially. But it just, again, shows you that the exploration of other senses can get you to places that are not necessarily obvious, but very interesting. And one thing I want to end up on here is what I call the empathy bandwidth. And if you think about it, designers really like to engage that deep empathy. But the way they do it, the way they access it, is through the senses. And they access it by going out into the wild, talking to people, experiencing things as people experience them, and then coming back and creating things based on a fiber optic sort of cable bandwidth, where they have hundreds of gigabytes to work with. And contrast that with an alternative approach, where a third party goes out into the wild, creates a report, that report gets passed on to the manager writes a brief, the brief lands on the designer's desk, all that context, all that sensorial context stripped down, and if the designer is lucky, it's a sort of semi-decent two-dimensional brief, and if they're not lucky, it's not even that. So, and that basically is your dial-up speed equivalent. So, absolutely crucial for designers to have as deep, as broad empathy bandwidth as possible to innovate. So there's really three things I would urge you to consider. So first of all, we all need to stop that sort of 2D world that we live in at work and allow ourselves to have more, to have a richer experience at work and with the things that we do, but also in the spaces that we have. We can't continue ceding the responsibility to the design community for engaging with that messy, complex world that we live in out there. We ourselves need to start taking this on board and saying, right, we have a responsibility to do that as well, even though it's messy and it's not clean, but it's absolutely necessary. And then we need to be mindful whenever we engage in that sort of brief writing, that we are in the process of reducing that empathy bandwidth. So we need to be mindful of these three things. So moving on to the next design attitude aspect. It's playfulness and playfully bringing things to life. And I think it's absolutely key. It underpins things like prototyping, things like exploration, things like productive dialogue within teams. It's the lubricant. It's the lubricant of innovation, really. That you allow yourself to be playful. You allow yourself not to be super serious all the time. This is absolutely key. So I called it playfulness in bringing things to life. And it's the willingness to unleash the kid within each of us, a heartfelt desire to experiment, prototype, and be playful. And I think this quote really does it justice. The opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. Why we keep saying it's the domain of somebody else to be playful, to be exploratory. If you think about it, play is everywhere. Play is all around us. If you think about all the ball games that we admire, if you think about all the people in the Olympics, the Olympians, we admire them too. They all play, and we all play as well in our spare time. But somehow, play gets a ban when we enter the world of work. This is my son, Mark, and his friend in the background. And he's 3. Next year, he's going to school. He's 3. Next year, he'll be in school. Sat down in one of these and taught to behave. I really can't see that one happening in reality. He's a little pocket rocket, but it really is sort of symptomatic of how we treat playfulness. So it's as soon as we start saying things, as soon as we start developing language, we are already taught to behave, to be structured, to be not too playful. And I think it's a shame. And designers know it, and this is the point. The designers really run with it for much longer than we do. And this example that I gave you at the beginning with the strawberries and plastic tubes is absolutely that as well. It's designers being a bit mischievous, a bit playful, a bit. Let's just see where this can take us. And this is how they do things. And the crucial part is that we all converse, we all talk to each other, and designers' way to talk to us is through objects very often. It's to create the conversations that are based around playful objects. It's their way of saying a joke. It's their way of lightening up the reality that we live in. It's a way of saying, hey, let's just have some fun. Let's not always be serious. And this is their equivalent of our joke within a conversation. Small things or big things, a subverted idea of a gun, and these are quite famous. The singing kettle, again, a small thing, but it could be quite an interesting one. A trunky, a suitcase you can ride on, very popular. A computer that you might want to lick. This is how actually this was the Jobs' brief to Johnny Ive. Can you create me a computer that people would like to lick? That's what he did. And this wonderful example of a pirate ship in an MRI. And to many people, and to you perhaps as well, these may seem as trivial, superfluous, unnecessary. To me, I see glimpses of hope and humanity. So the final design attitude aspect involves 2 things. One is the fact that designers have to work with absolutely a crazy plethora of building blocks and different and disparate building blocks. So you're talking about different domains, different teams, completely different subject matters, different senses, all at once. And they have this willingness to really sort of embrace that disparateness of the inputs and stimuli. Whereas very often in the business world and elsewhere, and you know what's happening to the knowledge these days, it gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And you end up with really siloed specialisms. And you can see just the proliferation of journals. There's a topic, there's a new journal. And that really is dangerous. And designers, because they don't have that sort of strict patch to protect, are much more willing to embrace otherness and embrace other disparate things in their work. It's not a skill, it's a willingness. And all these things I've been telling you about, these are not skills. They are just mindsets. They are willing, they are willingness. So I've called it creating new meaning from complexity. So it's a willingness to work with and reconcile multiple, often contradictory domains in order to make substantive progress. So the second point is encapsulated here. It's really taking all those things and saying, okay, let's not just reconfigure things, let's create a new meaning. Let's create a leap in understanding. Let's create a leap in comprehension and utility. And Christopher Alexander puts it in this way. So we are searching for some kind of harmony between 2 intangibles, a form which we have not yet designed and a context which we cannot properly describe. Designs are actually in the very heart of that. Just to give you a couple of examples. Alfredo Moser and Surian Nadine changed the meaning of a piece of consumer waste, i.e. the PET bottle, by filling it with water and some bleach and plonking it into the rooftop. And it got millions of homes using this as a light source during the day. But they've circumvented and created a new meaning of that piece of waste. It's no longer a piece of waste. It's actually a very, very useful thing. 2 design students and a colleague created an Airbnb. And in the process, possibly, changed the way we travel. Rather than going from one hotel to another, nameless hotel, we go and explore the communities. We explore the people with their lives. And it's potentially changes things dramatically. Not for everybody, but for a big proportion of society that are prepared to do that. So again, it's changing the meaning. It's not changing, it's not fiddling with objects. It's very often changing the meaning of them. And I love this one. 2 design students came up with the idea of an invisible helmet in Sweden, as you do. And it's a glorified airbag, yes? But it circumvents and it shifts the meaning of what it means to wear a helmet. You no longer need to put stuff on your head. You put it as a color, and it deploys when you start to fall. And then it protects your head. And it actually is selling quite well in Sweden, by the way, so it's not a sort of flimsy thing. So they are all very interesting examples, and I believe we have a lot to learn from designers and from their community. And really, if you think about it, they are really good at bringing all those different pieces of information and really being at home with ambiguity and uncertainty. So we should take some notice and don't really behave like a sort of rabbit in headlines of ambiguity and complexity, but rather embrace it and create a process that looks forward, looks to new things. And we really, really should think about moving in the direction of new things, and designers really point us there. So the final thought is that if you think about yourselves, you say, okay, I'm not a designer. I'm not a designer. Can I use any of this? Can I start employing some of these things that are hiding behind the design attitude? And I would say absolutely you can. Absolutely. Because as somebody so estimated that over 90% of all the design decisions are not made by designers. So we all have a role to play. So just as a recap of all the things I've been telling you about today, here are a few tips of how to go about it. So when it comes to ambiguity and uncertainty, I would say don't close the brief too soon. Don't focus on the initial idea and fixate on that. Allow yourself to pivot. Allow yourself to evolve as the process goes forward. Be exploratory. Be brave. And be prepared to surprise yourself. And don't forget about not dismissing strawberries in the process. For deep empathy, I would say don't just do it. I would say just let go. Just let go of 2 notions. First one, that you know that you are better, and then you know better. Yeah? And as Michlewski would say, go native or go home. Yeah? So really, go native or go home, otherwise you're not there. And the third one is the 5 senses and the empathy bandwidth. So here, I want you to have 2 images in your head. Vision and hearing equals dial-up. All 5 senses and aesthetics equals broadband. Just remember those things. And finally, playfulness and playfully bringing things to life. Think about it as a WD-40 of innovation. It really helps to smooth the process and make it better for everybody. And finally, embracing the chalk and cheese on steroids is the fifth aspect of the attitude of design. It basically, there's so many disparate things, and you need to not be afraid to capture them all in your process as you're going about it. So just to leave you with the final thought. Designers are brilliant at innovating, and they really point the way of how to do things. And you might want to employ these things, you might not employ, but it's certainly worth thinking about that. And in the process, when you employ the aspects of design attitude, if you're lucky, you can come up with some significant competitive advantage points. And if you're really, really lucky, you might end up as some with a $700 billion company in the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I have to say that the issue of design attitude really began with Dick Bolin and Fred Colopy here at Weatherhead a number of years ago in discussing the development of the Gehry building. And we're seeing it picked up in the design attitude work of Kamil. And I have to tell you that this is getting traction around the world. This approach to attitude, replacing the narrow focus on method, is becoming quite an important area. We have a few minutes for questions, and there's a reception downstairs. Are there any questions about design attitude and for Kamil?
Any controversies?
How are you seeing, in the startup world, a lot of folks are using sort of lean methods, Steve Blank out of Stanford. Where are you seeing sort of the overlap between lean startup and some of the things that you're talking about?
There's a fair bit of an overlap there, but I understand that the lean methodologies are really sort of process-driven. They're predominantly issues around minimum viable product, how quickly you go to market, and how much you focus on iterating sort of early concepts. And it's very much, as I understand, the focus on processes, and we talk about that quite a lot. That there is enough focus on processes and tools out there. You might have heard a lot about design thinking as a sort of methodology that can answer all the questions that companies have, and it's a similar thing with the lean management and the lean method. The scrums and all that sort of thing. It's very IT driven as well often. So I'd say that there is some overlap in terms of the process of quickly coming up with something and potentially rolling with it. So the sort of ambiguity aspect, but I think it's missing the sort of the other intricacies that designers bring to the party with the five senses and ambiguities of the complex, different, disparate elements and so on. So, but there are overlaps.
Curious about the role of intuition in the process. Is that more at the ambiguity level, or is it in the sixth sense? Or is it while you're tinkering, allowing you to trust where does intuition come into this? It feels like it has a place.
Intuition absolutely has a place. And it has a place on a very fundamental level, the level that I think cuts across all of these. Perhaps particularly the aspect of ambiguity and open-endedness, but also maybe around five senses and aesthetics, where people are, really allowing themselves to be driven by it, and not necessarily driven by data points initially. And I really must point out, the designers really take the data points on board as well, but the sort of the outset, the sort of entry point is very much, aligned with sort of initial intuition about what the human being, what the human user really wants. So I would say it cuts across their ways of thinking and behaving.
examples were either products or experiences, and I wonder, have you any insights into what Dick Buchanan would call like the fourth order of design, which I think means, you know, thinking about, say, strategies for organisations, and how, because I think it would be a fairly brave chief executive who would get up in front of his shareholders and say that, you know, the world's ambiguous, we're just going to experiment and play, and you know, they probably wouldn't last very long. But I mean, so do you have any experience on what this attitude could help inform the design of strategy?
Absolutely, and I think Apple are a prime example on the strategic level of absolutely doing that, absolutely embracing it. And Johnny Ive really is the sort of heart behind the effort. Many people think is the jobs. You know, I've talked to Johnny, and he actually is the driving force behind Apple, and he is very ambiguous at the strategic level. They allow themselves, you'll notice, much longer lead times, and that's exactly the point, that they are allowing themselves to do that because they are doing it at the top level. And very often there's this interesting loop between the physical products or the services or the systems and the strategy. And they allow themselves to loop back into the strategy rather than strategy funneling down into the product. And that's the key difference on the sort of strategic level. But I would agree, and I actually have some thoughts about stretching design and that sort of culture that comes from the art world into the sort of fourth order. And I believe that it has a role to play. And I'm seeing, just recently went to a book launch by Christian Basin, who writes about the impact of design on policymaking, which is absolutely in the sort of fourth order. And it's making big inroads into that world, which is, you would think might be surprising, but there are governments in the UK, in Denmark, and other countries really seriously taking design on board. Which, as I say, it's wonderful. But I think that there are limits to what I call the arts-based design project, design professional project, with that sort of fourth realm.
There is a metric that we've developed around these 5 features of design attitude, and I've been very interested in the relation of the metric measuring the self-assessment of strength of each of these, whether it's in a business school or in a design school. I'm curious whether you've given some thought to that, or if you've encountered differences in the degree of embracing the elements of attitude, because I'm assuming attitude can be cultivated.
Yes.
And that's a key part of what you're saying. But how about this difference between a design school and a business school? Could you comment on that?
Absolutely. So as part of, behind this is a book, and it's coming out early next year, and I understand February, March. And to complement the stuff I did on the sort of ethnographic level and the interview level with the companies, I did a quantitative exercise fairly recently, in which I asked around 250 people from all walks of life and all specialisms in order to score them on these five attitudes. And I was absolutely astonished. I really genuinely wasn't expecting it, but there was a big difference. Out of 50 statements, something like 35 were absolutely statistically significant between the two different groups. So we had people from that classed themselves as I am a designer, versus other people from other walks of life, including the business students who aren't obviously designers, and the differences were staggering across all five.
One thing that we found here at Weatherhead is that incoming MBA students seem to have a high tolerance of risk. On the scale of 1 to 10, they'll go with 8 or 9, meaning they're very open to taking risks, not worrying about the outcome being key at the beginning. But we find in the second year of MBA study, as people are beginning their capstone courses, that willingness to tolerate risk has dropped significantly. And it's the most startling of all of the measures that I've been doing over recent time. It doesn't happen with design school students. It goes up even. Why do you think that's happening?
I think it's exactly the point that I'm making. It's a culture that forms them. It's a culture that molds these people in a particular way. So they come in fairly clean slated, and they are being squeezed into a particular mold, and that mold is different in the business school to the mold that is applied in the design school, and I think that's exactly it. So the courses, the ways in which business schools are set up, and the values embedded in them really manifest themselves in different ways of going about shaping people's attitudes.
So you don't think that it comes as a consequence of greater knowledge of the complexity of the business world?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think so.
I really appreciate your reminder about not being so serious and taking yourself so seriously, and the whole idea of play. There's a really good book called Deep Play by Diane Ackerman. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a marvelous book. And she's studied animals and people, and I think that's something that we really need in a work environment and in business, is more of an openness to play, because that leads to liberating us and creativity. So
I agree.
just appreciate your.
And I see that in the way designers operate, and they really are. You know, it might seem a sort of trivial small thing, but it really isn't, because it really unlocks the potential in people, and unlocks sometimes the best way to really move the process forward is to be a bit subversive. So in the book I called the designers there's a figure in Polish mythology, we call it he's called Stanczyk. He's a jester. He's a very clever jester, and I sort of liken designers to really clever jesters, because they are given the permission by the society to be playful. And they say, I can do things, and somehow, while ceding the responsibility here as well, somehow that happens here with play as well. You know, we don't need to be playful. Designers are playful, or people use the word creative, which I really dislike, and sort of giving them permission that they can have fun whilst we be serious. And I think it's it misses the point of our humanity, and misses the point of really lubricating the creative, the innovative process that we can engage in. And designers know that instinctively, again, and their schools are not drumming this out of them. They're not. They're really embracing that and helping people be playful through the different things. Think about how role play is something absolutely essential to how designers go about their lives, and also what they carry then into industry. I see many consultancies based around role play and based about how designers create services. So they seem to be now at the forefront of creating services, not sort of marketing consultancy. I'm part of strategic brand consulting called the Value Engineers. So it's those consultants that are based around sort of the values and ideas of design that are leading in that sort of space, because they are playful, because they are experimental, because they're open-minded and open-ended in many ways, and are given that permission by the society as well.
I was wondering, out of the 5 dimensions of the design attitude, if there was one in particular that you thought was the biggest stumbling block for folks who are getting trained in the way that is typical in management schools, and if you had a concrete way of overcoming that stumbling block.
A big challenge, I would say. The major stumbling block, as Dick was saying, is actually the attitude to risk and attitude to open-endedness, because we do really. There's a number of issues there. Spiraling costs is one. Having exactly the sort of framework, having a very specific brief to which you're working, and we often, in my world of consultancy, we often have one of the first exercises in workshop. We say, okay, what's the vision of success? What does success look like? And if you have that sort of framework, it's very often quite difficult to overcome and say, actually, you know what? we don't know what the endpoint is going to be. So I think that's quite a big one, and I don't think I have an answer to to how to overcome it at this particular point.
I have a question for you. It's easy to imagine developing these 5 attitudes in coursework or something. It's easier even to imagine them developed trivial. So easy to make play a trivial matter. This is all pretty serious stuff with regard to pedagogy, though. And so I'm curious about the degree of exploration where this becomes serious matter, serious play, within, say, a management school or even in a design school. Designers think very carefully about the assignments they give to their students, very careful attention. So it isn't just open-ended, but there's an understanding of where people are going, what kind of things we're trying to develop. Could you comment on this issue of how you bring this into education?
I think education actually is a pretty good place to experiment with these things. It strikes me as a better place potentially than the sort of fast-paced business world. And one of the ways in which you can potentially do that is it's really opening people's minds up that there are other ways. Because very often, to the point of modularization of knowledge, and this is how universities are set up, and how we are. I used to be part of an RE. I used to be a lecturer at a university, and the key bit was how many papers within a very, very specific field do we bring to the party, to the so-called RE exercise that then scores all the universities in the UK. And this is a big issue on a sort of system level almost. That somehow you need to break this down or challenge that, and it's not a trivial thing to, at the beginning of the process of educating people, or at the system level, to start saying people, look, there are other ways, there are other models out there, which include these elements, which can take you to a different place, which can really, help you become a fuller human being at the end of the process, but also actually create potentially very powerful pieces of innovation. So I think, getting people to understand at the beginning of the process, opening them up, and then challenging some of the assumptions behind, in the system on the overall level. That's how I think you need to start the process.
Just make a comment. I was an international advisor on the RAE in Britain, and we saw that bean counting attitude that was really appalling at times. It's been the weakness of the RAE. We're trying to shift that. It's a system problem.
It's a system problem. It's a system problem.
Well, I think we appreciate the time you spent. Are there any other burning questions? Or, well, I have one here.
Yeah, so you mentioned metrics earlier, and
Yes.
So my question is, how do organizations kind of create a baseline for where they think they may be in terms of these criteria? And then, and I know this may vary, but what's your thought around what ultimately is the goal? Is it higher employee satisfaction? Is it creating shareholder value? What are those things that you sense that the ultimate end game is for implementing this design thinking? And then another piece of that is, and you have in your piece here, as you talk to people and kind of ask them how creative are they, it goes back to your thought about it. You really have to watch them to determine that, right? They, if they're comparing themselves to Apple, they might say not very, but if you watch them in their everyday work, they might be very creative. So can you just respond to that?
Yes, I think it's a good point. Which of these, and how do you embed that? If that's your question, how do you embed it in an organization and measure against this? And my thinking is that it's really tricky, because what I'm talking about here is not necessarily what others are talking about, which is the sort of tools and process-driven method, if you will. Exactly what you're referring to, design thinking, is a whole big field of consultancies jumping on the bandwagon and saying, do this process that's like a double diamond or something else, and you're going to be sorted. That's really important. But what I'm talking about here is something more fundamental. So it's something to do with culture change. So it's, as you know, as anybody that worked in that field, is really difficult. So to measure, how cultures are changing and sort of measure to the beginning and the end. And so, because you have things like, basic assumptions in place. You have, attitudes, which are sometimes slightly easier to measure and so on. But I think that there are ways in which you can start to measure, and we are demonstrating that some of this can be measured, and so if it can be measured in the environment of the university, it can be measured in the environment of a business, and you might choose to measure people on the in and measure people on the out, and the end game, I think should really be creating rounder individuals in businesses. So they will be happier as a result. No doubt about it. They will be happier in businesses if they are allowed to express themselves in more than two senses. They naturally will be happier because it's more close to their humanity. But it also, if they are really serious about implementing these things, it can lead to really dramatic leaps in innovation and understanding, because your starting point isn't blinkered profit. Your starting point is, what can I do to make this individual human being happier? And if you think about it, that's just a broader point. There's this distinction between users and consumers. These days, companies in Silicon Valley really don't care about profit initially, for ages. Yeah? What they do is, do millions of people use my stuff? That's what they're interested in. Do people use it? Yeah, and that's why designers have so much credence there. Because they basically, absolutely, people use it, we'll monetize it later. We'll make sure we're going to make some profit out of it. And I think to me, this is symptomatic of something bigger. This is a whole big shift from really focusing on how do I squeeze more profit to how do I do something that enriches people's lives and human beings, and in the process, actually, then I can sort of create my point about that, yes, you are bound to create an interesting point of difference and maybe even create the biggest organization on the planet. But it's really not the starting point. And so enriching people is going to help, I think, ultimately, the bottom line as well.
I think that was a wonderful question. I've been teaching CEOs in China, and as part of the overall process of teaching design and management, we've talked about the powers of the mind and the attitude, and we've had surprising response from CEOs in China. The last place I would expect. Thank you very much, Kamil. I appreciate your